Thanks for joining me again. I
Thanks,
keep
Jeff.
I keep wanting to record these conversations because I feel like good things come out when we think out loud together. And
Yeah,
appreciate you and your role in our church is, I don't know, kind of like our official / unofficial women's ministry leader. I know you
very
whistle at the
unofficial.
thought of the title.
I'm
Yeah, you
not into
prefer.
formality.
Yeah, I'm not either. Just the other day, someone on Facebook reached out, someone I haven't talked to in years, and they were saying, I don't know what to call you, bro or pastor. I'm like, please, I'm not big on the formality stuff.
That's right.
I'm with you.
That's right.
I'm with you. Anyways, Tracy, appreciate you and
Thank
you're thinking
you.
on a lot of these things. And so we were talking a little bit before I pressed record here. We're gonna just spend a little time talking about the elephant in the room. Everyone's thinking about the protests, the riots,
Yeah.
the looting, all that's going on right now. It's as you said earlier, it's basically eclipsed the coronavirus. Now it's like no
Yep.
one's even talking about COVID-19 anymore. Now it's all this.
No.
So let's just address the elephant in the room, say a little bit about it because it is a good illustration of human nature and helps
Yeah.
us appreciate our need for our Creator, our
Yeah.
good God and our Savior. And so let's just talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that. And then later in the conversation, we'll touch on what we wanted to originally talk about, which was the topic of sanctification in Romans 6. So,
Okay.
okay. So you said earlier, and let's just elaborate on this. You said this situation with the rioting, the looting, the violence that's taking place in response to, or allegedly in response to what happened with George Floyd, that tragedy, that
Yeah.
this has weighed on you more heavily than the pandemic has. So why
Yeah.
is that?
Well, partly the way I'm wired, like when it came to the virus, we're all united together and everybody's working together to hunker down and do what needs to be done to, initially it was to help the medical field, right? To help the hospitals
Flatten
and
the
the
curve.
doctors to get
Yep.
their stuff together so we didn't become like another Italy.
Right.
And so that to me is like, yep, God is sovereign over this. We're all a team. This is what we all are doing together. We're all in the same ship. But then when I think last weekend, when the news of the monuments in DC were being vandalized, I think that's when it hit me the hardest. And so then this is now the opposite of where I always knew we were divided as a country in recent times, but the level of violence and then the amount of justification and even kind of moral support behind it really saddens me and saddens me kind of for the same reason, but because we're not united together behind we're Americans. Now it's like, no, everything about us is bad. Our history's bad. The past is bad. Even everything we're doing right now is bad. And then everybody's painted with this broad stroke of, so what that policeman did, he did it because he was white and that man is black.
Right.
And what I was telling you before we hit record, the part that grieves me about that situation was he was a mean person who had no regard for another person, and in his bitterness and anger and power trip, he killed him. Yeah. And it's so, to me, it's a human dignity thing and less about, I don't know. So anyway, then the division and the animosity and that is what I'm it's depressing to me, and
Yeah.
And knowing it's human nature is depressing.
Yeah, it's sad. Yep, sad along. I like you. I'm probably wired similarly in some ways. So yeah, I don't know if it's weighed more heavily on me. I'd have to think through it, but it's definitely weighing heavily on me. And like you, just seeing the violence. Yeah, it's horrible to see. And
Yeah.
who knows what all the motives were behind why that police officer did what he did. I don't know.
Right.
And I'm not,
Right.
there's no excuse for it, obviously, but I was trying to think through And it's all speculation, and that's what we love to do this. We love to
Right.
speculate regarding the motives of other people. That's one of our human instincts. But I was trying to figure out, well, what could possibly motivate him? And I thought, well, maybe it's because he felt like there was resistance. And, when your kids are resisting your authority and you're frustrated and you're in a volatile situation, and sometimes you double down on your aggression, trying to make your point or trying to
Yeah.
resolve the situation. Then when he's being filmed and there are people around him criticizing what he's doing, some personalities might be apt to cave to that and say, well, I better, and others are going to double down and say, how
Yeah.
dare you question my methods? And now I'm even more determined. Maybe his
Yeah.
ego was hurt. I mean, who knows? There's so many possibilities as to what was
Yeah.
going on inside of him.
Yeah.
Only God knows, right? But you have
Yeah.
one fallen human being doing something that's so clearly atrocious to another human being. And hey, was skin color a factor? Maybe. I
Maybe
read
for
recently
him.
that
Yeah.
those guys may have known each other. They may have worked. They were both worked at the same. I don't know if you saw that, but they both
Huh.
worked at the same. I want to say it was a club. They were both bouncers at the same club. Maybe at
Oh
different times.
gosh.
Maybe overlap. So there could have been history there. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's a horrible thing. We all agree on that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so some of what I struggle with and what I wanted, I wish there was a way to communicate about this that would just level the playing field and
Yeah.
kind of where we could all just say, hey, look, even something like racism, we talk about it as if it's this thing, this evil, dark, insidious thing that appears in certain people at certain times. And it's like, look, we're all predisposed to preferring people like us, whether it's skin
Yes.
color, socioeconomic level, a sports team that we like. There's a gazillion ways that we humans divide over things.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be surprised that race, yeah, it's an issue. And it's always going to be an issue to some extent. And it's not just one direction either.
Hmm.
So,
That's exactly right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other part too, even regardless of what his motives were, I mean,
Mhm.
if anything is alarming about that situation is he had a long rap sheet, he had many complaints against him, then he shouldn't have been
Yeah.
allowed to be in that position
Yeah.
on the police force.
Yeah.
But for people to be freaking out and now blaming other people outside of that immediate circle and make this about a particular politician or that we're all
Yep.
racist. But like you said, we all have a bias towards things and people um, and interestingly, I think in a way this may even kind of morph into our sanctification conversation. But I mean, someday the earth will be free from that
Yep.
bias because really, I think that bias comes from what's built into each one of us is self-protection, right? And I keep talking about this in our ladies Bible study that even the animals, and I'm looking out this way because I can see my field out there, and we have deer and coyotes and hawks and mice, and where there's all kinds of the circle of life happening right out that window. But animals are in self-protection mode and they have to fight for
Fight or
survival.
flight.
And
Yep.
so that's the part that's sad to me, and yet then amazing that God is sympathetic towards that, has given us help, if nothing else, mental help right now, meaning a mind to know this will not last forever and we will get to be in his
Yeah.
presence at some point. But then that the new earth will be free, everything will be free from this corruption that we're all subjected to, animals, plant life,
And
all of it.
definitely human beings, right?
Yep, and
That
humans.
is interesting. I've been thinking back on a video. I posted like a 3-minute video on Monday. I was in a dark place, having read different articles and watched videos on this topic, struggling, and I just found myself reading the text in Isaiah 9 about Jesus being the Prince of Peace. So I shared
Mm,
this 3-minute video talking about how we as humans, we get stirred up with all this turmoil within, with our greed and our jealousy and our anger and our contempt for other people. and how we all are plagued with that stuff, and how God has mercy on us, and
Yeah.
Christ is the Prince of Peace. And as you're saying, one day he'll come back and he will put an end to all this. And I talked about how, there's no hope in any human governor or social
Yeah.
justice warrior. And so I had the thought, I shared it. And then afterwards, as usual, I'm sort of thinking back on it, and I'm thinking, gosh, if I put myself in the shoes of someone else watching that and listening, they could easily say, it's okay, nice pie in the sky stuff, man. But like, what about, like, we still have decisions to make. We still have a problem to try to navigate through. And it almost seems like a cop out, right? An escape.
Yeah.
But, and I totally get it, because I'm thankful for the people, whether it's the leaders in the law enforcement realm or the political realm, or even people who are leading these demonstrations. Like that, there are roles and responsibilities to engage in. But I think from a faith perspective, we're saying, look, like, pause, like, think about what's
Yeah.
happening. Think about the
Yeah.
complexity of this. Think about every individual. So last night and all these nights for now, I don't know how long, over a week maybe, but all
Yeah.
these, right, like all these individuals, every heart is unique and different, and every person is churning with a form of turmoil, a
Yeah.
anger, a resentment, a frustration, a contempt. And that's on both sides of the protesting line, the side of law enforcement, the police officers, the National Guard members, each individual unique person struggling through it. And then you've got these people who are part of the protests, and then the unruly protesters, the rioting. Every individual is very complex. And so
Yeah.
while it may seem like this cop out, to me, if you can look at the complexity of it and see, as you alluded to earlier, like the broken creatures of this world, including human beings, and to hear there's a God who has mercy, who is the Prince of Peace, who understands better than we understand why we get stuck where we get stuck, and who's made provision for our forgiveness. And he's given us this hope that, hey, one day this is all over, because I'm going to reign supreme, and everyone's going to see my value, and the fighting for the fight or flight, all that stuff can be gone, because I'll be your provider, and it will be clear to you that you have everything you need. You don't need, so much of this is driven by greed and jealousy, and people protecting their stuff, and people trying to get there. It's like, wow. And that's just human, and we can't just extract ourselves from it.
No.
Or flip a switch and make that stop, or flip some supposedly super spiritual switch and just say, well, I'm going to be godly about. No, it's just, we're all human beings, and we could all
We
pop
can't.
at any moment.
Yeah, we cannot escape it. And I think by design, I think that really hit me so as we were kind of marching through chapters 6, 7, and 8 of Romans, and I was even looking at my notes. We've actually been swimming in that for 2 years now, in different parts and pieces. But
Yeah, right.
as we were looking at the resurrection, again, looking at the natural body versus the earthly body. But in there, in Corinthians, it talks about how each thing has its own glory, and that was a goodness. And so it kind of, it hit me that even us right now, in God's eyes, where we are stuck at, this is good. It's not like we're vile and disgusting and we're garbage, all those things that I used to hear in the Reformed thinking of, I'm a worm, I'm just nasty. But it's in a sense, in this earthly system, even that fight and flight that we keep talking about, that's a good thing. It has its purpose. But anyway, in the Corinthians, it's talking about, but we will have the new body like Christ, and then the earth. And now I'm combining this back with Romans 8. Even all of creation will be no longer subjected to this corruption. So right now it is good because it has its purpose. Even the animals need to have that fight or flight, or we would all be devouring each other immediately. Life wouldn't be able to go on. And so I think when we get in his presence, we're going to then fully know him. And I think that's part of our problem. And that's where I keep saying we can't really help right now especially non-believers, we're kind of stuck in this twisted, warped thinking about who God is.
Right.
Um,
And then
and
you're going to do what is natural when you can't
yeah,
see it any differently, right? And that
no,
helps if you can understand that, if you can take a step back, understand that somewhat objectively, it might help generate a little bit of compassion. And that's what
yeah,
everyone's calling for, is understanding and compassion, right? And so maybe
yeah,
it can help with that. But I
yeah,
want to, let me ask you, well, go ahead. You're going
yeah.
to say something else? I don't want to cut you off.
Well, no, I was just going to say one thing I do want to be careful of though is because again in my old way of thinking,
Mhm.
my thinking is always changing. So I don't want to say I have old and now I'm new and I've arrived. I'm always
Right.
processing this stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
But I used to think that there would be a faith response to things, there would be a godly response to things. And then as we delved into grace, I would say, oh, well, grace means I just hold back, I just stay quiet, I just
Right.
accept God is sovereign. And now I'm like, that is all true, but practically now there's
Yeah.
things we can do or don't,
Yeah.
like Donnie did on Sunday. Here's a petition. If you agree
Right.
with it, sign it. If you don't agree
Right.
with it, sign that one. But it's okay to do stuff, and it's okay to do practical things. Um, it doesn't mean now you're not trusting God. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there
Right. Because we try
because
to almost over spiritualize sometimes, right?
yes,
Or, yep,
yes,
create this odd category, which we've talked about
yeah,
something as in Christendom, like there's this thinking that you're just going to be able to have this godly response. And then look,
yeah,
it's like, oh, I should be careful, but I'm going to be
it's okay.
watching this video tonight where a local African American pastor, prominent pastor, is going to have a discussion with the former chief of police of the city of Olympia, and a couple different pastors in the area are going to be hosting this and trying to move forward this conversation about racism and the gospel. And I don't know what it's going to cover, but I know other things I've seen and articles I've read
Hmm.
so far. I don't know. There's like this thing, like if we can just really get this perspective of Jesus, then we can kind of resolve this, or at least move in the direction of resolution. And I'm not saying, to your point, I'm not saying there aren't things we can do. Like there are things we can do and there are conversations to have that can be beneficial. But I think sometimes we underestimate the depth and complexity of the problem,
Yeah,
and we maybe overestimate our role or our
yeah,
ability to, if we can just kind of use the right language and lean into our super spiritual compassionate side, we can resolve this. And I would say, well, okay, to a degree maybe, but think about when you coexist with your own family and you love these people more than anybody, and yet there's conflict and there's disagreement and there's trouble
yeah,
because they're different from you are in subtle ways. These people, your kids and your spouse, I mean, these people are most like you. You picked your spouse, and then these kids are genetically, they're like you, and they're like you in
yeah,
other, but still there's conflict. Like it's human. It's human nature. It's human
yeah,
experience, and we wait till the day when, it says in First John, we will be like him because we see him as he is.
yes,
So I think just rooting, I don't know, it's helpful for me at least to think along those lines a little bit in my mind, a little bit. It's a little bit more clear. But I want to sort of like ask you a question. Maybe you can clarify, because this has come
okay,
up before, and I want you to elaborate on this. But saying,
yeah,
well, there was a time when, as someone in the Reformed camp, I would have thought, okay, humankind depraved and ugly worms and
yeah,
worthless and
yeah,
so on. And so you're saying, look, I don't see it that way anymore. And I don't either. Like that we are created, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? We're
yeah,
good creatures. Now, there's fallenness and there's an ugliness to that. So I guess that's where the counterbalance would say, when you look at, for example, I don't know if you saw this, I think it was an older couple, small business owners, maybe New York somewhere. They went to try to stand in front of their store,
yeah,
and a group of rioters came up, and this older couple is just standing their ground, standing in their way. And at one point, the little mob of the young people starts to walk away. Well, then one comes back and just starts wailing on the older lady. She's probably in
Yeah.
her 50s, 60s, and he just starts
Yeah.
beating the tar out of her. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then the husband starts to try to get involved, and this other guy comes up, and he's literally swinging like a 2x6 at the
Mm,
husband, at the wife. The one guy's holding and sort of wrestling with the older woman, and this other guy is beating her with this board.
yeah.
Hey, that's pretty nasty. Like, that's
Yeah.
not just like, I don't know, like words we could use. Well, it's not healthy, or it's not. I mean, it's really
It's
atrocious, right?
brutal. It's
Brutal.
brutal.
And what happened to your illustration earlier, what that officer did, kneeling on George Floyd's neck
Yeah.
for
No.
minute after minute after minute, like an
Yeah.
eternity, it seems like,
Yeah.
when you're watching
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's not a small deal. So
Yeah.
help me understand, what do you mean when you say,
Yeah.
well, we're not worms, we're not, like, because we would say, I think we're all capable of the worst things, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm really thankful that you're asking me to clarify that, one, so I can even think it through as I'm communicating it in the future and even thinking about what do I mean by that. And as you were describing those situations, so first and foremost, I think when I first said that we're not vile worms, I am thinking about how God views us, all people. And I don't mean he
Yeah.
views us as these cute little angels and he looks at those guys with the bats in their hand as evil. I really do believe God looks at all of his creation with tenderness. And so first I'm speaking from what I believe is God's view of us.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking of, what is man that thou art mindful? I think about how, um, well, so I think that God is viewing us with a tender, compassionate heart, because just like when we see a human being, especially as parents, maybe not all of our children, but when you see somebody acting out in their pain and they're kicking and screaming, you, if you're really close, yes, you're going to have you want to react in kind and get really irritated. But for the most part, it's like you're broken for them because you realize they are in so much pain
Mhm.
that they are hurting others.
Mhm.
And I believe that is how God is looking at us.
Yeah.
The fact that he even so loved the world that he is giving us Christ. And then, as the natural next question should be, so what does that mean and what does that look like? Because we're all still beating on each other, there's still wars and all of that. So, first and foremost, when I say we're not vile worms, I am meaning from God's perspective. Therefore, I don't need to look at myself as a vile worm. And I wouldn't encourage you, Jeff, to go, oh, I'm a dirty, rotten sinner. Like, I just think that kind of talk isn't helpful. I don't think it really fits to what God is communicating to us. But back then, so on a practical level, as we're dealing with each other, I have no problem saying that is brutal. So as I pull back, the person with those bats and balls and whatever they're doing to people, I, I believe deep down, now this is just from a spiritual perspective, not that I'm going to say, so be nice to that guy. I'm saying that that violence is coming from somewhere.
Yep.
And it's usually from being deeply hurt way back at the very beginning. And their only recourse is to learn to inflict pain outwardly.
Mhm.
Um, so, uh, um,
So
so what I am not saying, back to what I said a minute ago, so now I'm not going to say, now we just need to be godly and show grace and just be nice to those guys. No, they need to be held to the extent of the law. They need to they need to have consequences to their crimes, because one, they're breaking laws, and just they have a lack of respect and there's no human dignity. And I realize it wasn't shown to them, but it doesn't make it okay. Therefore, now it's okay for
to
you to not show
perpetuate
it
it,
to somebody else.
right?
So in a huge nutshell, That's how I would answer that.
Yeah, right. No, I understand that. And it's not to say that when God looks at these atrocious actions taking place, that he's not affected. We believe he's grieved by the things that take place,
Yeah,
but he also is grieved with a level of understanding that we just have a small fraction of
yeah,
his understanding of the complexity of a heart in turmoil, a heart that
yeah,
is fighting to survive, a heart that
yeah,
is fighting to sustain itself and rescue itself and please itself and prove itself. He
yeah,
sees all that and has compassion.
yeah,
And then you see Jesus, and I think that's where these words come from. When he's hanging on the cross, having himself been victimized, the only innocent man to ever live, having
yeah,
himself been victimized in the most egregious of ways, and he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I think that's
yeah.
where that comes from. He
I do
sees that
too.
complexity. He sees that, okay, in one sense, these people may know what they're doing, but in another very real and deep sense, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and a lot of factors, just for fun, I'll throw in there, because I
yeah,
have I have friends and relatives who are in law enforcement, and I have other friends and relatives who are thinking more along the lines of the progressive left in something like this. So I have people on the whole spectrum,
yeah,
and and I think it's worth noting that who we are, to include our skin color, to include our socioeconomic status, has to some degree, skin color for sure, but the other things to some degree been determined by forces outside of our control completely.
yeah.
Right? I mean, I didn't have any decision to make in what family I was born into, where I
Exactly.
was born, and when I was born. And that too can be, in my mind, an equalizing truth when we think of, okay, look, I could easily be someone who's born in the inner city with no father present, and
Yeah,
those are all difficult things to go through. And that's what we would say, hey, look, and God, looking down on humanity, sees us and treasures and values his creatures, and is grieved by the destruction we bring
yeah,
into our lives and the lives of others, and has mercy and compassion. And the cross is about him conveying to us his forgiveness, right, and
yes.
the healing that we need. Now that
Well, and
begs
in
the
a
question.
way,
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but even when God looks down and like in the Exodus, he's going to come down and dwell amongst us. And Christ was the actual fulfillment of that. Christ came and lived all this stuff that you just explained, right? He lived a life of being uh mistreated, if you want. I mean, whatever we do to each other as human beings, we don't respect each other. We don't we if it means if I'm in pain or hurt, which then becomes anger, and you're in my way, it's you're going to feel the effects of it, right?
Yeah, that's
Directly
right.
or
You're
indirectly.
expendable. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And Christ willingly came and dwelt in that environment for us. So if nothing else, again, it is God, the unseen God, becoming seen in Christ to see the heart of God. And even when you just said that, thinking about Jesus wept, he
Yeah.
even weeps. So, I mean, if we feel soft in our heart and grieved or sad about these circumstances, or something, I'd say globally, what's going on in our country,
Mhm.
I mean, God's heart is way bigger than mine. So that came from somewhere. That's not just me having a soft heart of my own accord, right? That is just a tiny bit of what God is actually feeling for us. And we see that in Christ is
Right.
is kind of my
Yeah,
point.
absolutely. In magnificent ways.